Well, are any of you guys, it's going to be an interesting way to start a sermon, but are any of you guys familiar with how a car engine works? Anyone know how a car engine works? That would be, if you could fix my truck in a little bit. No. I don't drive a Dodge, so it's fine. So, for those that don't know, let me give you a very simple insight version. And for those that do know, don't please critique my engine knowledge here. So inside an engine, you see there's this thing. There are these rods, right? We call them pistons. There's this rod. And they move up and down together, and they help the engine spin, and we get power, okay? So these rods are in this chamber, and these rods are moving up and down, spinning this thing to make our engine run. But for it to move up and down in this chamber, it needs a few things. And so one, gas shoots into this little chamber, and then a spark ignites that gas and causes a little explosion, and that explosion pushes that thing down, and then an explosion on the other side pushes it back up, and it's moving up and down. It's just little explosions of gas and what you call a spark plug. And so those things together make this engine run. And it's interesting because you actually need both things to make this engine run. You need the gas, you need the spark, plus a lot more. Yeah. Simply put, but if you have one and not the other, it doesn't work. So if you have a spark but no gas, it's not going to run. If you have gas but no spark, it's just going to keep shooting gas. We call that flooding an engine, because it keeps shooting gas in there, but nothing's sparking it to keep it running. It's not going to go anywhere if you're running out of gas. It's not going to go anywhere if you don't have a spark. It just sits there idle. You guys see where I'm going now? The same way, there's a few things we need as believers to really keep us moving. Sometimes as churches, we talk a lot about reaching our community. Right? We can do a sermon series on it. We'll study a book on it in Sunday school. We'll put big signs out at our church saying that we like to reach the community and how important it is. We'll have meetings with people in the church, and we'll discuss all the best ways to reach the community. Man, we'll bring in special speakers into churches that'll teach us all that they know about reaching the community. Sometimes churches will even change their names to things like Church on Purpose. And we'll sit back, and we'll feel like, man, we did such a good job. Man, we are all over this thing, reach the community. But what did we miss? We never actually reached the community. You see, we're like an engine that keeps pouring in gas, but nothing's creating a spark. And so we're not moving anywhere. We're just a flooded engine. So this morning we're going to continue to look at the life of Peter. Peter, we saw last week being chosen as a disciple, right? As one of the very first, maybe the first disciple. And so this is a man that was chosen by Jesus, and then he immediately started following him, right? We saw that. Jesus came to the shore and he said, "Come and follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." Peter left everything aside. He said, "Oh, I got chosen by that guy, I'm going." And he immediately started following him. We see he was likely the first disciple with his brother, and he stuck by Jesus in his life. While Jesus was with him, he never thought he would have ever left his side. He really was one of Jesus' closest friends. We see that Jesus had this inner circle of three closest friends in life. Peter was one of those. He even got a nickname with his brother. I don't know if you know that. This is super cool. Him and his brother, Jesus called them the Sons of Thunder. In Oklahoma, we should really appreciate that, right? I want to be the son. Me and Jonathan, can we be the Sons of Thunder together? I'd take that. Sons of Thunder, that's pretty cool. And he told Jesus he would be willing to go to prison or die for him. And he was the first apostle to recognize Jesus as the Son of God even, right? So he was by his side. Well, that was until Jesus was sentenced to death on a cross. This shook Peter, changed him. It caused him to sit back and stop actively following God. Peter even denied Jesus 3 times in a given day, right? Remember that? But then 3 days later, Jesus appeared to him in person, and it stirred him into just sharing the gospel, stirred him into serving Jesus once again. And he went on to serve God in amazing and powerful ways. He was the first person to preach at Pentecost. If you read that in Acts, he was the first person to preach at Pentecost. And he was first person to share the gospel with a Gentile. That's me and you. He was martyred for his faith. Pretty incredible. So we're going to look at a couple different passages this morning that are important to the life of Peter. And so, like I said, last week we saw his call to following Jesus. While he was working alongside his brother fishing. And this week we're going to look at a few other important things. And so we're going to start in Luke 22. So if you want to turn to Luke 22 with me this morning. We're going to read verses 31 through 34. And then we're going to skip a little bit to verses 54 through 62 in Luke 22 this morning. We're going to see some interesting points that we just pointed out in the life of Peter. Luke 22, we'll start in verse 31. If you are there, if you'll stand with me as we read the Word of God together this morning. Jesus is foretelling Peter's denial here in the first passage. He says, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Peter said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death." Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you even know me." Let's skip to verse 54. Then they seized him, Jesus. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Let's pray this morning. God, how incredible to look at the life of Peter. God, a man who was Jesus' one of his closest friends, Lord, one of your closest friends, and he followed you while you were with him. Something happened. You got scared. You turned away. Lord, I'm so thankful that the story doesn't end there. And Peter, you didn't give up on him. You came to him. You stirred him once again. God, and he was able to follow you so powerfully. Lord, I pray this morning as we look into his life and we reflect on our own, God, that we can take a look at where we are. Whether we're Peter, denying you for the people, afraid to follow, afraid to be known. Or Peter, after you came back, excited, on fire for you. Speak to us this morning, humble us, teach us, make us into the image of your Son. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. So we know that one of Jesus' closest friends and followers was Peter. And he was known to not be always right when they were together, but he was passionate about following after God. He loved following God. He was just ready to go. This kind of reminds me of Mark a little bit. Sorry, I'll call him out. He's just ready to fire. He loves following God. And some of us, some of you, may be there right now, right? It reminds me of like when you're at youth camp, you go to Falls Creek or somewhere, and you got a fire ignited in you, and you're just ready to go. You may not always know exactly what to do, but you're ready to go. And we're ready to go to prison or die for him like Peter. However, in time, something happens. Something happens that changes things for us. See, Peter never would have thought he would have been someone to stop following Jesus, especially not deny him. However, something happened in his life. You see, when Jesus was arrested, something changed for Peter. And for us, it usually isn't something quite as dramatic as what Peter went through. But something happens that keeps us from following Christ so closely. And it's usually something like comfort or convenience. You see, maybe you didn't see Jesus taken and sentenced to death, but oftentimes we can look back at our lives and we can see that we used to be actively following him. Maybe every day we got up and read our Bibles, seeking God, but something changed. Maybe we get out of the pattern of regular Bible study in our life. Maybe our church didn't have a small group, a fellowship group that really fit us, and so we stopped going to one. Or maybe we didn't have a Sunday school class that didn't really fit you, so you got into the pattern of just showing up for a worship service. Man, maybe we got tired and started resting on the things we had done instead of looking every day to what God is doing now. Maybe things like sports or rest or hobbies. Maybe they started getting in the way. And whatever it was, we stopped igniting that fire. And you see, like a car engine needs that fire and that fuel, the church needs a few things. We need a few things. And to me, that fuel, that's our knowledge of what's right. That's us knowing what we should be doing, right? We know we should share the gospel with the lost. We know we should come to Sunday school. We know we should be doing Bible studies. We know we should be opening the Word, spending time with God and reading it in prayer every day. But it's merely something we know we should do. Because we know lots of things we should do to actively follow Christ. And many of you guys could probably teach a class, right? On here are a bunch of ways that you should be actively following Christ in your life. Here are things you should be doing. But we aren't always actually doing anything. We don't always actually move. And you see, knowledge without application isn't wisdom. Acting on knowledge is real wisdom. Acting on what we know. Because we can look back at our lives and we can see sometimes we've stopped following Jesus. Man, we may not openly deny Jesus like Peter did here, but we deny Jesus by the fact that we aren't obedient. We deny him and his truths because we don't follow him. But see, the awesome thing about God is, he doesn't give up on us. He didn't give up on Peter. Every day you woke up, every day you wake up, you know God still has a plan for you. He's still moving. And the question is, what's it going to take to spark us back into action? And so I kept thinking about this question, and I was wondering, man, we have an amazing church, an amazing group of believers here. Many of you have been following Christ for decades, right? But then I thought, man, why do we only have like 25 adults in Sunday school when there's like 120 adults that come to the worship service? I realized it wasn't an issue of what anyone knew. It's not what you know. Many of you could probably teach me all kinds of things about following Christ in life, right? Some of you have been following Christ, you've been a believer for longer than I've even been alive. But it was rather a matter of that fire. Because I think when you team the fuel of the knowledge that things you know Christ has asked for you in your life, and you put something in there that ignites, that creates an explosion in an engine. And man, that can make people move. See, Peter had something happen in his life that reignited that fire, that flame, and it allowed that flame to never go out. It wasn't a temporary thing like I went to Falls Creek and it was cool, I went to a conference and heard this great speaker, and it got me going for 3 weeks, but it was something that kept the flame in him alive. Man, he didn't keep to having these little short-term bursts of energy. He had something ignited a fire that kept him moving for the rest of his life, to the point where he was crucified. You know what that truth was? Jesus is real. You see, he lived in a day of doubt, maybe a few days of fear and doubt, because Jesus was hung on a cross and he didn't know what to do. But when we look ahead into Luke, we see chapter 24, verses 36 through 50. We see something change. Let me read this to you. As they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them, the disciples, and said to them, "Peace to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do you doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that is I myself. Touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they were still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the laws of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, "Thus it is written that the Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and behold, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you. But stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high." And he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. See, Peter realized that Jesus really was the Messiah. He didn't just think it might be true. He actually saw the resurrected Christ and knew it was real, knew it to be true. Man, and that truth is something that changes you forever. And I'm not talking about salvation. The fact that the God of the Bible is real and the Jesus who came to earth really is the Son of God means that everything they say is the perfect truth and the most important things you'll ever know. See, people all over the world and all through time have been looking for the meaning of life, right? It's a big thing. What's the meaning of life? We not only know the meaning of life, by the way, the meaning of life is to bring God glory by following his plan for our lives. That is the meaning of life, in case you were wondering. But we know that the one who created life and gives it meaning is a person we can have a real relationship with. We know him. Now, we may say that we believe these things, right? But the question is, when we say we believe these things, are we saying it like Peter was saying it to Jesus before he was arrested? "Oh, Jesus, I would never leave you or forsake you. I'd go to prison or to die for you." That wasn't true, was it? Not that time. Or when we're saying that we believe these things, are we Peter after Jesus had appeared to him when he knew it was true? Let me tell you, we show what we believe with our lives. Because if you wanted to consider which part of Peter's life you are, the question is, how would you figure that out? And I think we would look at whether we passionately follow Christ by diving into his word. by studying it with other believers, maybe in Sunday school groups or Bible studies? Whether we come together like this and worship God together? Do we serve Him out in our communities as we bring the gospel to the gospel message to the people that are lost? Because isn't that what Jesus commanded of them before He ascended into heaven? We talked about this, I think, on Wednesday night. Imagine that you have one last opportunity to tell someone you love something important. One last chance to talk to them. That last thing you said is probably the most important thing you would say. You would take time to really consider that because it's so vital. It's the last chance you have to talk to them here on earth. Jesus had that here on earth. You know what He said? Go and reach the lost. Make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey the command that I have commanded you. But take heart, because I'm going to be with you always. The last thing Jesus said in His earthly ministry before He ascended up to heaven, He told them, guys, go and make disciples. And so, Peter heard that after Jesus came back to life. And then Peter dedicated the rest of his life to ministry. He passionately followed God's will for his life, and he was martyred for his faith. Peter famously was sentenced to die on a cross like Jesus, but he felt that he was so unworthy to die like Jesus died, they hung him on a cross upside down. He wasn't worthy even of death like Jesus. You see, he actually believed Jesus. He didn't just believe in Jesus, he believed Jesus. And I'm telling you, don't just believe in Jesus. Believe in Jesus, right? But don't just believe in Jesus. Believe Jesus. Don't just believe in Jesus so that your ticket's punched and you're going to heaven. Believe what Jesus tells you about living your life right here. Believe Jesus. Man, the truth of who Christ was and what He wanted for His life was the spark that Peter needed for the rest of his life. That's all he needed. All he needed is to know that Jesus was real and what Jesus wanted for his life, and that was enough for him. That kept that spark going. Man, I was talking to my wife about this, and I was reminded of our senior adults here at this church and how incredible they are. And anytime these church doors are open, they are here. Man, they have multiple Sunday school classes on Sunday morning. They've got a Wednesday night class. They've been coming here meeting on Wednesday nights before we even have Wednesday night classes. Man, they serve throughout the week. I see them all throughout the week as I'm here in the office, coming in, doing different things, helping different people. I guarantee you they're sharing the love of Christ in their personal lives. And I just thought, man, we are so blessed to have these people in our church. And you know what? That just builds me up inside. Seeing you guys actively follow Christ. And we are blessed to have amazing people in this church. And I had hoped that we did this Who's Your One sermon series, this challenge. I hoped that would really ignite something in us in a church. And let me tell you, I have been amazed at what I've heard this last week. It has been incredible. And I've gotten to hear stories from many of you guys about you seeking who your one is. Maybe I've heard some stories about you knowing who your one is and things that God's been doing and some amazing things, how He put that person in your life, or some opportunities you've had to serve that person and reach that person. Man, I'm seeing the spark hit the fuel, and I'm seeing you as a church move. And it has been incredible. This week has really blessed me seeing you do that. And it made me think, my one is my neighbor. I just moved here to Sand Springs. My one is my neighbor. And his name's Jonathan. And I'm thinking, man, I'm so ready to talk to this guy and share with him. I don't know him. He's got two, like teenage girls, I think, or young girls. Then I'm like, he is in for it. He's going to come just and talk to me one day, and he's like, ready. What's about to happen? You guys have got me excited too, seeing that flame in you guys, seeing you guys move. And what's incredible is, like an engine, it doesn't take many of those rods moving to make that car go. And like a church, we're the same way. It doesn't take many of us moving to start the movement of this church. But man, you put a bunch of those rods in an engine, that thing can go quick. We got a bunch in this church that I've seen throughout this week moving. And that excites me because I can see that's how God has chosen to move, right? Didn't God choose His church? Us, you and me? Didn't He choose us? And that's how He's going to move and reach people, affect communities, bring glory to His name? And man, we started moving. And I just got to tell you guys, that has excited me. And if we just have a handful, we can do a lot of things. And we got more than a handful. You see, a rod and an engine moving can make it move. But faith in the hands of a willing servant can move a mountain, right? Isn't that what we read? It can definitely change a city. And I'm excited to see the faith in the hands of not just one willing servant, but a church full of them. And may we not just be a church that talks about reaching the lost for Christ. May we not just be a church that discusses the best ways to reach the lost, that does sermon series and Bible studies. But may we be a church that realizes what Peter realized. Jesus is really the Messiah. He actually came to earth, died for the sins of the lost. That's everyone. He actually did that. Was killed on a cross, buried in a grave, put in a tomb, and 3 days later, He defeated death for you and me. He actually did that. Like, it's not just something we read in a book and we can say that we believe. It really happened. Peter saw it, and the rest of his life was changed. He said, I don't need these temporary sparks and sermon series in my life. I don't need to go to a youth camp or a conference to get me going because I saw Jesus and I know that He's real. That means everything He said to me is exactly the perfect truth. And you know what He said to me before He left? He said, go and reach people for the lost. And so Peter went and reached people for the lost. Any opportunity he had, he preached and he taught and he reached people who needed Jesus. The Gentiles, these people that were set apart from the Jews, these less worthy people, he went and talked to them too, the first person to, because he realized Jesus said, go. And as you're going, reach the lost. And he believed Jesus. Man, I'm excited to see the life of this church. People that don't just believe in Jesus, but people that believe Jesus. Because we can change a city for the glory of God. Amen? Will you pray with me this morning? God, this morning, gosh, I'm fired up. Lord, not just because I believe You, but because I've seen a church move because they believe You too. I'm excited to see what You can do. Lord, when I read this Bible, I see You do amazing things in the life of believers. And this morning, as our worship team comes back up and gives us an opportunity to respond, I pray that we actually respond. I pray that just as Peter responded, we respond.